Since the dawn of humanity, countless cultures around the world have held prophecies and tales foretelling a time when an epic final battle between the forces of light and dark would destroy the earth, and where the victorious forces would be given the power to become the rulers over a new reality. And though to many this battle may seem like the legendary stuff of stories, there are those who believe that the final battle is upon us, and that Armageddon has indeed begun. However, it is essential here to understand that, contrary to popular belief, Armageddon is not a battle that can be fought and won on the battlefields of man, but rather the true Armageddon can only be won in the hearts and souls of humanity. For though it is possible that we will see an escalating conflict rise across the face of the earth in the days and months to come, it is essential to realize that these external battles are only a reflection of the conflict that is raging within the hearts and souls of so many across the world today. For in accordance with the universal law, as above, so below, as within, so without, the increasing tensions that are rising on our global stage are surfacing in an effort to help us recognize the conflict that is taking place in the consciousness of each one of us. For today there are many who are awakening to the truth that humanity has lost its way. People all over the world are beginning to realize that the race of man is walking an unsustainable path, and that our governments, whom we have entrusted with the care of our planet and its populace, are willfully destroying the earth and its inhabitants in their tireless conquest for war and wealth. However, because we have become so dependent on the existing system and structures for our comfort and survival, many people feel powerless to step off the path and live a life that is in alignment with the truth that is growing in their hearts. For they fear that if they remove their support from the system that they have come to depend on, that threat to the system will then result in a threat to their own survival. And so, ironically, we have a growing number of people around the world who are denying the truth of their hearts for fear of the possible threat it may pose to their comfort and survival in the present. While these same people are beginning to realize that their continuing support of the existing system along its current path will at some point in the not-too-distant future lead to the inevitable destruction of the planet. And thus, in accordance with universal law, as long as more and more humans continue to allow this conflict to rage in their hearts, by denying the truth it is demanding to be acknowledged, the external manifestations of this inner conflict will continue to grow in intensity in our outer world until they eventually lead us to the final battle of Armageddon and the breaking of the world. Thus we may see that humanity's current damned if we do, damned if we don't scenario is requiring us to make a leap of faith, whereby those who see the truth of humanity's current self-destructive path are urged to take the courageous leap into the unknown, by acting according to the truth of their hearts and facing the unknown consequences of their actions, so that they may avoid the certain destruction that they see is coming. And it is because so few are able to make that leap of faith that will allow them to follow their hearts and free themselves from their attachment to the existing system on which they have come to depend, that at the close of every major world cycle, when we need it the most, we are given the blessed battle of Armageddon, by which the world as we know it may be broken so that it can be rebuilt. For it is only by breaking the world and its existing systems that those humans who felt powerless to make the leap for themselves to a new way of being are then given the push that they so desperately need to free themselves from their dependence on the crumbling system that no longer supports them, and thus be freed to discover a new way together. While the necessary destruction that comes with Armageddon and the breaking of the world also serves the essential role of eradicating the foundations of the old system, so that we can then create an entirely new foundation for an evolved way of seeing and being in the world. Thus it is the evolutionary importance of these endings that is being referred to by the speaker in the book of Ecclesiastes when he says, "Better the end of anything than its beginning." For in our spiraling evolution, each end brings us to a new beginning that is on a higher plane of our evolutionary journey. And though many will discount the stories of Armageddon and other such tales of the days of tribulation as mere myth, the reason that these stories of the past live and continue to be told in cultures throughout the world, as if prophesying what is to come, is because these events serve an essential role in facilitating humanity's spiritual evolution. And therefore, as long as that purpose needs to be fulfilled, there will always be an Armageddon and an end of days. For as long as humanity has and will ever need that push to free itself from its outmoded systems and beliefs, one can be certain that Armageddon is sure to come. If one can consider that the breaking of the world through the event of Armageddon plays an essential role in our spiritual evolution, by giving those who feel powerless to let go of a system that they have come to depend on the necessary push that will allow them to free themselves into a new way of being, then one may also come to see that there is an essential evolutionary role that is fulfilled by the prophesied days of tribulation and the end of days, which assures that one day the end will come, so that we may experience a new beginning. For though many will not allow themselves to consider the end of the world as we know it, let alone the end of themselves, it is this essential part that dying to the old plays in allowing us to evolve into the new, that is expressed in the story of the fiery phoenix, whose brilliant new being is born from the flames that she herself has set to her nest and previous self. And it is this concept of giving oneself over so that they may be raised to new spiritual heights that is reflected in the words of the Taoist sage Lao Tzu when he says in the Tao Te Ching, "If you want to be given everything, you must give up everything." And though there are many for whom our talk of tribulations and the end of days will arouse feelings of fear and anger, causing them to plug their ears and tune out our voices, in an attempt to deny the inevitable truth that everything we see in the material world will eventually pass away, it is important to realize here that plugging one's ears to the truth does not make the truth go away. For in accordance with the liberating law of impermanence, all that has arisen will pass away. Because the constant state of our universe is that it is always changing. As destruction leads to creation, and life turns to death, then back to life again. And it is with this understanding of the universal law of impermanence that the true prophets from the earliest times have always foretold of war, death, pestilence, and famine that would lead to the downfall of many kings and great nations. For these prophecies telling of the destruction that accompanies the end of days have been given to us to help a forgetful humanity remember the impermanent nature of our material existence, so that we may then be inspired to seek, and therefore find, the greater spiritual purpose of our existence. And thus, in accordance with the prophecies, the physical events that typically occur during the end of days have been designed to escalate to such a dramatic level that most of humanity will be faced with the possibility of their own death, and the loss of everything that they have worked to achieve in the material world, all of which would occur for the divine purpose of shifting humanity's perspective from the physical to the spiritual. For in a world where so many are living only for material achievement and survival, it will not be until that material reality is threatened with extinction, and when money and luxury fail to satisfy our needs for peace and comfort, that the majority of people will awaken to the worthlessness of material wealth and success, and thereby be inspired to seek inwards, to find a new purpose and meaning for life. And in doing so, many will finally understand the words that they have been uttering for so long, which state that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but rather we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And thus, when the events of the end of days have served their divine purpose, when the death and destruction have shaken us from our material obsessions and given birth to our awareness of the eternal spirit that connects us all, we will learn to see the world in a new way, where even death and destruction, which humanity has denied and feared for so long, are seen to have a place and a purpose for which to be thankful and loving. It is this essential part that the end of days may play in assisting humanity's spiritual evolution, by awakening us to the liberating law of impermanence, and thus our spiritual purpose for being, that ensures that one day an end will come. For it would appear that humanity is in need of a severe shaking to wake it up from the madness and illusions of its current existence. Thus, when the prophesied end of days reveals that everything we have come to believe, and all that we have strived to achieve, can be swept away in an instant, then may we realize the depth of foolishness that we have exhibited by living only to attain temporary material wealth, pleasure, and success for the self, at the expense of our eternal spiritual soul. For there are many in today's world who are willingly selling their souls by taking jobs that contribute to the suffering of the earth and others in an effort to climb the ladder of success and survival, while others, whose occupations may seem more caring and considerate, are still so preoccupied with their individual pursuits of fun and fulfillment that they consistently turn a blind eye to the suffering that is caused by their willing participation in our self-destructive society. However, when the death and destruction that necessarily accompanies the end of days demonstrates the impermanence, and thus the utter futility of striving only for material gains, and when amidst the collapse of the temporary material, we come to see the strength and beauty of the eternal spirit that remains, then each of us will have the opportunity to acknowledge the truth that our purpose for existence is not to attain wealth, pleasure, and success for the self in the material, but rather we exist only to develop our spiritual selves and souls by learning to live a life that demonstrates a love and respect for all. This function of prophecy and the destruction that comes with the end of days, to awaken people to our spiritual purpose by demonstrating the worthlessness of material achievement, is revealed by the prophet Isaiah when he says, The walls of broad Babylon will be razed to the ground, her lofty gates set on fire. Worthless now is the thing for which peoples toiled. Nations wore themselves out for a mere nothing. And though there are some whose fear of death and the end of the world as we know it will cause them to continually deny the liberating law that all that has been made will be unmade, it is important to remember here that the end of our civilization is sure to come, as it always has. And we can choose to either run from it and eventually be overtaken, or to face the fact and thereby be freed from our fears. However, in our present world, many people are simply unwilling or unable to consider the inevitability of death or destruction. While anyone who speaks aloud the universal fact that the world as we know it will one day come to an end is labeled a conspiracy theorist, freak, or fearmonger. And yet what those accusing fail to understand is that it is only by contemplating the inevitable end of ourselves and the world as we know it that we can then prepare ourselves for the eventuality. For the end is sure to come someday. And for those who are unable to cope with this fact now, before it happens, how will they ever be able to deal with it when the time finally comes? It is understood in the Buddhist tradition that the quality of mind that one has at the moment of death determines the quality of mind that one will carry into the next life. And so, how better prepared might one be who has contemplated their own passing throughout their life than one who for all their life has run from the eventuality of death? Similarly, how better prepared might one be who is able to consider the inevitable end of the world as we know it than one who out of fear is unable to consider what is sure to come? For one who chooses time and time again to close their ears and deny the fact that all things have their end will prevent themselves from perceiving the subtle perspectives implied within the liberating law of impermanence that have the power to free one from their deepest fears of death and destruction. While one who is willing to contemplate the nature of death will thereby awaken to new life. For the greater the fear one faces, the greater their liberation. And thus one who is freed from the fear of death is finally free to live. For it is the things that we fear most that will eventually set us free. As one who is able to face their fears rather than flee from them in fright is eventually liberated by the realization that there is, in fact, nothing to fear. For fear is an illusion created in the mind of the beholder. A reality that can be illustrated by considering the fact that fear does not come from the thing that frightens us, but rather fear is created by the one who feels it. And the truth of this may be realized when one considers that there is an increasing number of people around the world who are able to consider the impermanent nature of themselves and our world without feeling fear, while others upon considering such things may become restless and terrified. Let this presentation then serve to show where our vibration sits. For just as those who can face such events without fear have proven, there is a way past fearing even the most unimaginable terrors. However, no one ever escapes their fears by running from them, for fear can only ever be overcome by facing it with love. Thus, one who is willing to face their fear of the end and use its existence as an opportunity to explore how they may then overcome that fear can then be liberated by the very thing they were afraid of, and thereby make an evolutionary leap into a new way of seeing and being in the world. For one who is willing to contemplate the liberating law of impermanence will also come to see the freeing perspectives it implies. For when one comes to accept the fact that all things are impermanent, then they may also come to realize that the same is true of death. Indeed, there is even an end to every end. For every person, like every nation, has its purpose to serve and lessons to learn during its course of life. And when a spirit's work is fulfilled in the realms of flesh, it passes on to perform other tasks beyond our human sight. And with these mysterious new tasks complete, it will then pass on again to other tasks. And by the soul's journey will continue until it attains the height of perfect life. And thus one may come to see that with the end of every end, there is always a new beginning. Similarly, one who faces their fear of the end and contemplates the liberating law of impermanence may then be further freed from the suffering one causes themselves as they face the ups and downs of life. For if one remembers that all things have their end, then they may prevent themselves the suffering that can be caused by creating an attachment to something that is certain to pass away. While one who is aware of the law of impermanence will also be able to bear the difficulties in life with relative peace and ease, knowing that whatever pain or discomforts they experience are sure to pass away as well. Thus we may see the essential role that the prophecies and the death and destruction that accompany the end of days play in assisting humanity's spiritual evolution by awakening us to the liberating law of impermanence. For it is through the act of facing the impermanence of our material existence that we may then awaken to the eternal nature of our spiritual path and purpose, and thereby be freed from our greatest fears. And by thus realizing the role that the end of days plays in awakening humanity to the truth of our spiritual nature, one may also realize that as long as humanity continues to believe solely in a material purpose for being, there will always be an Armageddon and an end of days. Another essential role that the end of days plays in assisting humanity's spiritual evolution, whose absolute necessity ensures that the days of tribulation are sure to come, is the opportunity that they provide to humble a humanity that has become so prideful of its achievements of the age that it has forgotten the will and existence of the creative intelligence known to many as God or Great Spirit. For it is the power that unmanageable strife has to encourage humanity to first realize its own limitations, and therefore awaken to the power and presence of the divine, that is echoed in the words of the prophet Isaiah when speaking about the end of days. He says, "Mankind will be brought low, everyone will be all that is high and lifted up, for all lofty mountains and high hills, for every tall tower and every towering wall. Then will pride be brought low, and loftiness humbled, and the Great Spirit alone will be exalted on that day." And false perceptions, it may then come to realize new truths and perceive the existence of a force far greater than itself. For the race of man has become willful and godless. Not only has it forgotten the existence of Great Spirit, but it no longer respects the spirit that resides in all living things. Rather, man in his confusion has come to falsely believe that he himself, through his material achievements of mind and metal, is the master of the heavens and the earth. In his pride and ignorance, man has cast aside the universal laws of the Creator, and lives instead according to the false laws that he himself has devised. Illusory laws that have been put in place to justify and perpetuate the madness of our current self-obsessed existence. However, in accordance with the Creator's universal laws, an end of days approaches, which will serve an essential role in assisting humanity's spiritual evolution by humbling the prideful race of humans and awakening it to the powerful presence of the Creator, as well as the flimsy lies of the laws of man. For the inevitable destruction that comes with the end of days will serve to humble a prideful humanity by reminding us that despite all that we have achieved, there are still greater forces that can take it all away in an instant. And in so seeing all that humanity believed to be real erased in a breath, we will then be given the opportunity to further humble ourselves by acknowledging the futility and selfishness of living only to attain for the self, at the expense of the earth and others. For what so few people understand today is that it is the will of God that all beings should live in peace, harmony, and cooperation with one another. And therefore we may see that humanity in its willful adherence to the false law of survival of the fittest, which encourages violent competition rather than respectful cooperation, is living in direct rebellion to the will of God. And thus what we are seeing in our world today is that man in his increasing pride, spurred by the supposed success of his efforts to master the earth and its inhabitants, has come to think of himself as God. However, in accordance with the Creator's universal law of karmic returns, it will be through man's over-grasping efforts to employ weapons and technology to rule the heavens and the earth as God that he will finally be shown the limits of his power. For though the Creator in his wisdom and mercy has allowed the crimes of man to continue for a time, giving humanity the opportunity to awaken to and amend the pride and selfishness of its ways, in accordance with the universal law of karmic returns, which states that all that one puts out into the world will be returned to them in greater or equal portions, humanity will one day be made to pay for its actions. For a humanity that lives to take everything for itself will one day have everything taken away. Thus the profusion of suffering and selfishness put forth by humanity, along with the prideful demonstration of its willingness to toy with things it does not understand, ensures that one day the Great Spirit will arise from his slumber and unleash the end of days, whose breaking of the world will show humanity that it is indeed the Great Spirit, and not material-minded man, who is truly the master of the heavens and the earth, as revealed in the words of the prophet Jeremiah, when speaking for the Creator, he says, "The end is coming on the four corners of the earth. I shall call you to account for your conduct, and bring all your abominations on your own heads. I shall make you suffer for your conduct and the abominations that are in your midst. And then you will know that I am Lord." And though many among our prideful humanity will be quick to deny their involvement in shaping the state of the world, and will instead lay the blame at the feet of others including God, and those that they would call the oppressors or orchestrators of our reality. It is essential to realize here that anyone who wishes to progress further on the spiritual path will be required to humble themselves and acknowledge the part that they themselves have played in making the world what it is. For it is in the act of humbling ourselves that we demonstrate the quality of our souls. For someone who has been caught stealing and yet denies that they are a thief reveals their lack of remorse and unwillingness to change. While one who cannot acknowledge that each of us has played a part in making this world what it is, through our own selfish pursuits of pleasure, fun, and self-fulfillment, reveals also their own remorseless heart and reluctance to change. For if one is unable to humble oneself and acknowledge the parts of their being that are hindering their spiritual growth, how will they ever allow that growth to occur? Just as one who is not willing to empty their cup of what they believe is true will never allow for the inflowing of new wisdom and awareness. That said, there are still those who would deny the part that they themselves have played in creating our world of suffering and selfishness, and who would prefer instead to lay the blame at the feet of others. And though it seems reasonable that one would perceive themselves to be relatively blameless in a world where we are constantly made aware of the horrendous crimes of others, it is essential to understand here that one who looks for blame outside of oneself is lost. For what degree of pride and ignorance would spur one to lay the blame for what the world has become at the feet of the Creator? For all the Creator has done was in His infinite love and wisdom He gave to us a world, and the will to do with it what we would. And given the freedom to treat the earth either like a garden or a garbage dump, is it not our own actions and inaction that have made the world what it is today? And though others in their pride will look on in anger and shake their fists at the Creator because of the harm and suffering brought forth on man, one must remember that in accordance with the universal law of karmic returns, we always get what we deserve, as determined by the joy and pain we willfully impose on others. Thus one may see that the only reason that there is so much suffering in the world is because humanity has rebelled against the Creator's will that all should live in peace, and instead lives by the false law of man known as survival of the fittest. And in so doing, man, in his willingness to fight and cause the suffering of others, in an effort to attain success and survival for the self, ensures that that suffering will always come back on him. And thus one who is willing to humble oneself will see that it is man's willingness to continually struggle and fight his way out of each successive challenge against each new opponent that makes he himself responsible for perpetuating the pain and suffering on earth. For this illusory law condoning the dog-eat-dog nature of our existence would have many amongst humanity believe that because one has the power to take and to tame, to condone and to condemn, to kill and to create, means that he should feel justified in doing so. However, what so few people understand today is that we are given the power and free will to do such things, not because we should do them, but so that we may demonstrate the quality of our souls through the choice of our actions. For one who has the power to overcome others and take what he wants for himself from the world demonstrates the quality of his soul when he chooses to use his power and gifts not to hurt others, but rather to help them. And herein lies another essential role that the end of days plays in facilitating our spiritual evolution. For not only does the death and destruction that accompanies the end of days serve the purpose of humbling humanity to the power and presence of the Creator, along with making atonement for the suffering we have caused by allowing us to feel it ourselves, but the experience of the end of days also serves to provide the necessary process of purification, whereby all false perceptions of ourselves and the world will be cleansed, so that we as individuals and a civilization may see unobstructed the true quality of our consciousness and spirit. For all around the world there are those who believe that they are right, while others are wrong, that they are good while others are evil. So too there are those who have been blessed with an awareness of spirit in the world that has allowed them to see the selfishness, pride, ignorance, and hate that have brought the world to its current state of disease, destruction, and disrepair. However, many of these people, prideful of the perspectives that have been revealed to them, are either unwilling or unable to see and accept the fact that traces of these same self-serving qualities exist inside themselves. And so it is for this reason that at the close of every major world cycle, we are necessarily given the greater and lesser periods of cataclysm and cleansing that come with the end of days, so that amidst the death and destruction, the madness and the mayhem, each one of us may demonstrate the true quality of our souls, and reveal whether, when faced with death and the end of the world as we know it, we will do as we have always done and cling to our material self-obsession and fight for our lives, or will we demonstrate our willingness to evolve and in love and humble faith surrender ourselves to Spirit. For though it is easy for one to say that faith is the way, peace is the way, love is the way, sacrifice is the way, it will not be until the climactic events of the end of days that we will see through our actions the truth of our soul's nature, and whether we will be able to act in accordance with our ideals of peace, selflessness, and love. Or will we, when faced with struggle and the need to attain for the physical self, demonstrate our nature by becoming godless with the godless, and thereby choosing to meet hate with hate, greed with greed, and fear with fear. Thus one may see that it is the clear demonstration of our soul's quality through the choice of our actions that has led many prophets to refer to the end of days by such terms as Judgment Day or the Day of Reckoning. However, contrary to what most people believe, we will be neither judged nor saved by the actions of some physical being of majestic stature living somewhere outside the dense material plane. But rather, in accordance with the universal law of karmic returns, each one of us will be responsible for our own judgment and salvation. For one who chooses to cling to their belief in the importance of the material during the chaos of the tribulations, and thereby demonstrate their willingness to fight for their life, will in their decision to cause others' suffering to attain for the self, ensure that that suffering comes back to them. For in the madness and chaos of the end of days, those who continually choose to meet greed with greed and violence with violence will cause that violence to continue to escalate to such a heightened level that that person will be forced to either humble themselves and give up the fight, or they will continue to fight until it eventually leads to their destruction. And it will be thus, through one's own actions, that they will have served as their own judge, jury, and executioner. For one who chooses to cause the suffering of others to achieve personal gains will reveal both to the person and to all of creation that their current level of consciousness still places all importance on the struggle for the success and survival of the temporary self in the material, over the evolution of the eternal soul in the spiritual. And thus it will be through one's own choice and their unwillingness to let go of the illusion of the self in the material that they themselves, and not some holy figure, will have determined that they should continue on with the suffering and struggles that are inherent in our material existence, until such a time that they are ready to relinquish the illusion of the self and move on to a more expanded perspective of existence. While on the other hand, there are those whose inner seeking throughout their lives has led them to an awareness that although our physical bodies and all we see will eventually pass away, there is a spirit that exists within all things that is eternal. Awakening to the eternal nature of the spirit self, these people have then come to see that our purpose in life is not to attain material success and survival of the temporary physical self, but rather we live and die so that through our experiences we may contribute to the elevation of our eternal soul. And with this awareness, one may then come to see that the soul cannot be harmed by the words or deeds of others. For the only hindrance to one's spiritual growth is the harm one does oneself by causing the suffering of others. And so accordingly, the only way that one may raise their soul to the highest heights is not by striving to attain for the self, but by giving freely of oneself to others. Thus, in the interest of assisting the soul's ascent, it is far better to bear the physical pains and give what one can to others during the end of days, than it would be to struggle and fight to attain for the self. Bringing to mind again the words of the Taoist sage Lao Tzu, who said, "If you want to be given everything, you must give up everything." Words also eloquently echoed by the Christ through Jesus when speaking of the narrow path that we may take to evolve beyond our current self-obsessed material existence. He said, "Whoever tries to save his life will lose his life. Whoever freely gives his life in serving life will save his life." And so, in accordance with the words of the sages of the age, words also eloquently echoed by the Christ through Jesus when speaking of the narrow path that we may take to evolve beyond our current self-obsessed material existence. He said, "Whoever tries to save his life will lose his life. Whoever freely gives his life in serving life will save his life." And so, in accordance with the words of the sages of the age, we may see that the end of days serves an essential role in assisting humanity's spiritual evolution, by giving us the opportunity to humble ourselves, and thereby demonstrate our willingness to evolve beyond the belief that we are meant to hurt others to secure success and survival for the self, so that we may move into a new expression of humanity that is committed to the peace and freedom of all. For in accordance with the words of the Buddha, hate cannot be conquered by hate. Hate can only be conquered by love. However, ironically, these words themselves, and the suggestion that people surrender the self and give up the fight to survive, will be enough to start wars of their own. For within the body and beings of many, this truth will cause a conflict between the mind that knows it should fight and the heart that wants only to help. And it is the rising struggle between our hearts and minds, amidst the increasing suffering of our external world, that gives life to the great battle of Armageddon that rages within. And it is this inner conflict, caused by this sword of truth, that is being referred to by the Christ through Jesus when he said, "You must not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." For the presentation of this radical idea, that one should give up the fight, will not only cause a war inside, but it will stir up a conflict amongst the people who are not willing to surrender. For as Jesus said, "This leaven of truth which I have brought to men will stir the demons up." And nations, cities, families will be at war within themselves. The 5 that have been dwelling in a home of peace will be divided now, and 2 shall war with 3. The son will stand against his sire, the mother and the daughter will contend, yea, strife will reign in every home. The self and greed and doubt will rage into a fever heat, and then, because of me, the earth will be baptized in human blood. But right is king, and when the smoke is cleared away, the nations will learn war no more. The Prince of Peace will come to reign. For those members of humanity who, amidst the death and destruction of the end of days, choose to surrender the self to spirit, will rise like phoenixes from the flames, thereby giving birth to a new humanity that honors and respects the oneness of life and the right to peace for all. And this restored humanity will once again be given the opportunity to live upon the earth, where it may continue its journey by learning the lessons that come, not by trying to rule over the earth as master, but by serving once more as the stewards of the earth, where the only law is love. We have been warned that in the end of days many false prophets will arise and deceive many people. However, in our current self-obsessed society, where so many are ignorant to the Creator's universal laws of impermanence and karmic returns, there is much confusion surrounding the idea of what makes a prophet false. And thus erroneously, in many cases, a prophet is called false when he contradicts the common beliefs of man. However, what so few people understand is that the prophets are given to humanity at the turning of the age, not to preach and reinforce the beliefs of humanity, but rather they come wielding the sword of truth, so that they may sever the people's bonds to the illusory laws of man, and thereby reveal the eternal truth of the words and laws of the Creator. Thus, the true prophets come not to comfort the nations, but rather they come to remind humanity of the impermanence of their material selves and civilizations, so that those who are willing to see the futility of struggling to attain for the self may then awaken to the spiritual purpose that is served by their life and death on earth. And it is for this reason that the prophets throughout all time, the prophets who preceded you and me, from earliest times have always foretold of war, famine, and pestilence for many lands and for great kingdoms. For it is the eternal truth of the message given to us by the prophets regarding the death and destruction that accompany the end of days, and the essential role that these days play in encouraging humanity's evolution from the material to the spiritual, that the Creator refers to when speaking to the prophet Isaiah. He says, "My spirit which rests on you, and my words which I have put in your mouth will never fail you from generation to generation of your descendants, from now on forevermore. The Lord has said it." And it is the importance of these end-time prophecies, and the power they have to reveal the hearts of man, and thereby alter the prophecies themselves, that is expressed when the Creator says to the prophet Jeremiah, "Tell them everything that I charge you to say to them. Do not cut it short by one word. Perhaps they may listen, and everyone may turn back from their wicked ways. If they do, I shall relent, and give up my plan to bring disaster on them for their selfish deeds." Say to them, "These are the words of the Lord. If you do not obey me, if you do not live according to the law I have set before you, and listen to the words of my servants the prophets, who again and again I have been sending to you, though you have never listened to them, then I shall do to this house as I did to Shiloh, and make this city an object of cursing to all nations on earth." Having thus explored the essential role of the prophets, whose words of destruction may actually prevent that destruction from coming, we may see now that the false prophets are those who deny the Creator's universal laws of impermanence and karmic returns, by speaking words that encourage humanity to continue on with their proud and selfish ways. A distinction made clear by the prophets themselves, who, speaking for the Creator, have said, "For all high and low are out for ill-gotten gain. Prophets and priests are frauds, every one of them. They dress my people's wound, but on the surface only, saying all is well." All is well? Nothing is well. They ought to be ashamed because they have practiced abominations, yet they have no sense of shame. Therefore they will fall with a great crash and be brought to the ground on the day of reckoning. Do not listen to what is prophesied to you by the prophets, who buoy you up with false hopes. They give voice to their own fancies. It is not the Lord's words they speak. They say to those who spurn the word of the Lord, "Prosperity will be yours." And to all who follow their stubborn hearts they say, "No harm will befall you." For which of them has stood in the counsel of the Lord, has been aware of his word and listened to it? Which of them has heeded his word and obeyed it? In days to come you will truly understand, I did not send these prophets, yet they went in haste. I did not speak to them, yet they prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel, they would have proclaimed my words to my people, and turned them from their selfish ways and their hurtful doings. Thus we may see that it is the role of the prophets, seekers and sages of our time, to serve as the watchmen for humanity. This they do by seeking peace along the ancient paths, so that in so finding they may then signal the way for others. However, those who would consider themselves watchmen must be careful in their work. For one who speaks falsely and leads the others astray will, in accordance with the law of karmic returns, be held responsible for their folly, as will one who has been shown the way, but who chooses not to light the way for others. For this is the word of the Creator that was given to the prophet Ezekiel. When enemy forces move against a land, its people choose one of themselves to be their watchman. And if he sees the enemy approach, he blows his trumpet to warn the people. If anyone does not heed the warning and is overtaken by the sword, his fate be on his own head. He ignored the alarm when he heard it. Had he taken heed, he would have escaped with his life. But if the watchman does not blow his trumpet to give warning when he sees the approach of the enemy, and if anyone who is killed is caught with his sins on him, I shall hold the watchman answerable for his death. Yet it is essential to understand here that one who would serve as watchman must not do so to save himself. For the work one does for their own gain, no matter the benefit to others, does not count for them on the spirit side of life. Therefore let your work be guided by love and wisdom and the will that others will find the way. And so, for those who see the signs and who hear the call, let us raise our voices together to tell the world that Armageddon is upon us, and it is a war that can only be won within. With our heads bowed and our hearts to heaven, let us give humble thanks to the Creator for blessing us with our lives and deaths, for our teachers and the teachings. Let us give thanks for all living things, and for the heavens and the earth, fire, water, and wind. Let us also give thanks for our families, friends, and foes, and for all that they teach us of peace, love, and forgiveness. Let us not look outside of ourselves for blame, but rather let us accept the part that we have all played in making this world what it is. And let us not pray to change the fate that is given to us in accordance with our actions, but rather let us humble ourselves and acknowledge that we are always given what we deserve. And therefore let us pray instead for the strength and the grace to bear the hardships whatsoever they may be, with the understanding that every end has its end, bringing with it a new beginning. Amen.
Republican and Democratic presidents alike, from Harry Truman to George Bush, stood for freedom and stood for certain propositions that would make America strong and healthy and grow the middle class and shrink poverty and stand against communism. And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
on.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the rest.
Number
of it.
322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look forward...
Are you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Every human on this planet is enslaved, whether they know it or not. This is not the crude and primitive slavery of ancient times. It does not rely on whips and shackles to keep the oppressed in their place. These tools have been rendered obsolete by much more sophisticated methods. That most of the enslaved are unaware of their condition and would in fact argue fiercely that they are free is a testament to the effectiveness of these invisible chains. You've heard the expression, money makes the world go round. There's truth in that. Money is the prime motive for human labor in modern civilization. If you want food, shelter, and clothing, you must have money. And unless you're part of that tiny minority that has more money than they could ever spend in their lifetime, then you must work, beg, or steal for that money. That's why you get up in the morning and go to work, even if you hate your job. And that's why the specter of unemployment is more terrifying for most people than the prospect of spending 50 years of their life performing menial tasks within the confines of a fluorescent-lit cubicle. Of course, in Western countries, some are fortunate enough to have pulled away from the brink and do not live in fear that their basic needs will be met, at least for now. And yet they keep spinning the hamster wheel. Why is that? Could it be because money and the bling that it buys have become symbols of status and prestige? Money offers an illusory form of social validation, but even those who are not caught up in distinguishing themselves by how much they accumulate still must acknowledge the social stigma that comes with poverty. The combination of these primal motivators, the need for food, shelter, clothing, and social validation, is a very powerful force. It's enough to drive humans to engage in all forms of activity, even to the point of harming themselves or others in the process. The accumulation of money is therefore an accumulation of social and psychological power, and those who control the creation of money control this power at its source. So who controls the creation of money? Well, in the case of the US dollar, it's not the government. This shouldn't be an earth-shattering revelation. The fact that the Federal Reserve is a private institution owned by a cartel of the world's most powerful banks is quickly becoming common knowledge. Even the mainstream media doesn't deny it at this point. However, the full extent of what this means is only clear when you understand how the banking system really works. And unfortunately, this isn't something we're taught in school. Once you have it explained to you in simple terms, you'll understand why. Every dollar in circulation is loaned into existence by a bank. The process begins with the Federal Reserve when they loan out money to the US government and to other entities. You've probably heard this talked about before, especially in regards to the interest rate on those loans, which the Federal Reserve raises and lowers depending on economic conditions. But what's never talked about in the mainstream is the fact that the Fed isn't actually loaning out money that they have. They are merely typing those dollars into existence on a computer. You may be inclined to believe that this money is based on some physical backing like gold, but you'd be mistaken. The Federal Reserve hasn't owned any gold since the 1930s.
The Federal Reserve does not own any gold at all. We have not owned gold since 1934. So we have not engaged in any gold swaps.
When the Federal Reserve loans money to the US government gives the Federal Reserve government bonds in exchange. These bonds are simply written promises to pay back the money that was loaned to them with interest through taxation. So to be clear here, the government is taking out a loan from a bank that is creating that money out of thin air, and they're expecting you, the taxpayer, to cover that loan. The absurdity of this arrangement is even more obvious when you realize that up until 1913, the US government created its own money and had no need for a bank to play the part of a middleman. That new money loaned out by the Federal Reserve enters circulation through the banks, accumulates in the banks, and in the end the banks end up holding all the cards. Not necessarily for the reasons you may imagine. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of money in circulation isn't actually created by the Federal Reserve, but rather by the ordinary banks that businesses and individuals use for their checking, savings, and mortgages. How is this possible? Well, like the Federal Reserve, ordinary banks are allowed to loan out money that they don't have. There are, of course, restrictions. Banks are only allowed to loan out 10 times the amount of money that they actually have. So if Wells Fargo has $1,000, they can loan you $10,000, and they expect you to pay back that $10,000 plus interest. This is called fractional reserve banking. 75% of all money in circulation is created in this manner. Now, as bad as this may seem, this is really only the tip of the iceberg. Most banks structure payment plans so that for many years, you're paying almost nothing but interest, and only start paying down the principal gradually. The result of this strategy is that in most cases, you pay far more in interest when you purchase a house than the house itself is worth. So here's the real question. If all money is created through loans, where does the money come from to pay for the interest? Let's say we reset the system to zero, loan $1,000 into existence, and charge 7% interest. We now have a total of $1,000 in the system, but we owe $1,000 plus interest, and that's more. The interest ensures that there's always more debt than money in circulation, because the money to pay the interest doesn't exist. Never has, never will. This would be obvious if there was only one loan being issued to one person in this manner, but when performed on a global scale, the reality is hidden, and is transformed into a game of musical chairs where the person ending up without a seat faces bankruptcy and financial ruin. Because every dollar in existence is tied to a debt, this creates an unseen force that draws those dollars back to the banks, kind of like gravity attracts a physical object to Earth. The catch here is that it's the labor of the people that moves that money. Every hour that you work to pay back a loan or to keep the government from throwing you in jail over income taxes is an hour worked for the banks. The total receipts from personal income taxes just barely covers the interest on the national debt. And even the principal for that debt all ends up back in the hands of the banks. And remember, that bank created that money out of nothing. Once you understand that the money that banks loan out isn't actually an asset, but is in fact a piece of legal fiction, it should be clear that you're working for these banks for free. This is a cleverly disguised form of slavery. If you manage to pay your monthly payments, then you are a successful slave, and you are allowed to keep the material comforts that come with that status. But if for some reason you fail to make those monthly payments, then the bank or the IRS comes to take your house, your car, and anything else you have of value. And if somehow, even with this enormous financial advantage, the banks still get themselves into trouble, you, the taxpayer, will be forced to bail them out. No matter what, the banks win. To say the game is rigged is an understatement. You might be inclined to think that if you live outside the United States and you don't use dollars, then this situation has no bearing on your life. But you would be wrong. The dollar is both the world reserve currency and the only currency in which oil is sold on global markets. This is often referred to as the petrodollar status. This means that wherever you live, whether your country is an oil exporter or an oil importer, you are affected. If your country is an oil importer, then you are affected by the fact that in order to keep your country running, you have to acquire dollars. To acquire those dollars, you have to send goods and services to the United States or to someone else who did. Likewise, if your country is an oil exporter, you are affected by the fact that you send your oil to the US in exchange for this debt-based money. You are exchanging something of real and tangible value for digits on a screen. And if for some reason the leadership of your country grows tired of this arrangement and tries to pull off the dollar, you'll quickly find the United States military at your doorstep ready to open up a can of democracy on you. Iraq learned this the hard way when they switched their oil sales to euros in 2000, and Libya when they tried to organize a gold-based currency for Africa. Debt-based money is a masterpiece of social engineering, the ultimate tool of the ruling elite. Yet in reality, the whole thing is nothing more than a construct of belief. Our chains are the chains of the mind, and the path to freedom must also begin in the mind. If we want a better future for our children and grandchildren, then we must work right now to reach a critical mass of awakening. Why did the United States attack Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen? Why are U.S. operatives helping to destabilize Syria? And why is the United States government so intent on taking down Iran, in spite of the fact that Iran has not attacked any country since 1798? And what's next? What are we headed for? When you look at the current trajectory that we're on, it doesn't make any sense at all if you evaluate it based on what we're taught in school. And it doesn't make any sense if you base your worldview on the propaganda that the mainstream media tries to pass off as news. But it makes perfect sense once you know the real motives of the powers that be. In order to understand those motives, we first have to take a look at history. In 1945, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world reserve currency, which meant that international commodities were priced in dollars. The agreement, which gave the United States a distinct financial advantage, was made under the condition that those dollars would remain redeemable for gold at a consistent rate of $35 per ounce. The United States promised not to print very much money, but this was on the honor system, because the Federal Reserve refused to allow any audits or supervision of its printing presses. In the years leading up to 1970, expenditures in the Vietnam War made it clear to many countries that the U.S. was printing far more money than it had in gold. And in response, they began to ask for their gold back. This, of course, set off a rapid decline in the value of the dollar. The situation climaxed in 1971 when France attempted to withdraw its gold and Nixon refused. On August 15th, he made the following announcement.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This was obviously not a temporary suspension, as he claimed, but rather a permanent default. And for the rest of the world who had entrusted the United States with their gold, it was outright theft. In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only U.S. dollars as payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the world's key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. The act of moving the dollar off of gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil-importing country in the world to start maintaining a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Paper went out, everything America needed came in, and the United States got very, very rich as a result. It was the largest financial con in recorded history. The arms race of the Cold War was a game of poker. Military expenditures were the chips, and the U.S. had an endless supply of chips. With the petrodollar under its belt, it was able to raise the stakes higher and higher, outspending every other country on the planet, until eventually U.S. military expenditures surpassed that of all other nations in the world combined. the Soviet Union never had a chance. The collapse of the communist bloc in 1991 removed the last counterbalance to American military might. The United States was now an undisputed superpower with no rival. Many hoped that this would mark the beginning of a new era of peace and stability. Unfortunately, there were those in high places who had other ideas. Within that same year, the U.S. invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War. And after crushing the Iraqi military and destroying their infrastructure, including water purification plants and hospitals, crippling sanctions were imposed which prevented that infrastructure from being rebuilt. These sanctions, which were initiated by Bush Sr. and sustained throughout the entire Clinton administration, lasted for over a decade and were estimated to have killed over 500,000 children. The Clinton administration was fully aware of these figures.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Miss Albright, what exactly was it that was worth killing 500,000 kids for? In November of 2000, Iraq began selling its oil exclusively in euros. This was a direct attack on the dollar and on U.S. financial dominance, and it wasn't going to be tolerated. In response, the U.S. government, with the assistance of the mainstream media, began to build up a massive propaganda campaign claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was planning to use them. In 2003, the U.S. invaded, and once they had control of the country, oil sales were immediately switched back to dollars. This is particularly notable due to the fact that switching back to the dollar meant a 15 to 20% loss in revenue due to the euro's higher value. It doesn't make any sense at all unless you take the petrodollar into account.
To preserve our independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our choice between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude. Wow. I place economy among the first and most important of Republican virtues, and public debt is the greatest of the dangers to be feared. It is incumbent on every generation to pay its own debts as it goes.
We must have a central bank to secure this country's finances.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their money, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless on the very continent their fathers conquered.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence
What's happening? Where am I? I believe perhaps you understand now, pal, but you are afraid. JFK. Hartman, what does this have to do with my house and my dog? Oh, okay, that's enough. I want to go home now. This is the last president to stand up to the Fed. You must see. On June 4, 1963, President Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110. This executive order empowered the U.S. Treasury to issue real money without the Fed. It would have worked. Kennedy's plan to dismantle the Federal Reserve machine had begun. 6 months later, John F. Kennedy went to Dallas and never returned. No way. No way they could do that. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, threw out Kennedy's order. And since JFK, no president has dared confront the secret powers behind the Federal Reserve. They consolidate bigger and bigger banks, print more and more money, accountable to no one, decimating our nation's wealth for the benefit of a few. Why? Why do this?
But anyway, I've had people calling me saying they go out to their mailbox and they find a little red dot or a little blue dot on their mailbox, and they wonder what the little red dot and blue dot is. Well, it's marking your mailbox by the government, so when foreign troops come in here on us after martial law, if you have a red dot on your mailbox, they take you out immediately and shoot you right in the head. But if you have a blue dot, they take you to the FEMA camps being built by Halliburton right now to house 50 million Americans. They're building enough concentration camps in America by Halliburton that Cheney's getting rich off of, Vice President Cheney's getting rich off of, to put those with the blue dot on your mailbox in those concentration camps. Now, if you go out and you find a pink dot on your mailbox, that means that they believe you'll be a good slave and you're going to go along with the program and serve our international Antichrist masters. So watch for that dot.
Have you heard that the Department of Homeland Security has purchased 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition last year? I mean, that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this country broke? I mean, you turn on the TV, you hear how we're laying off air traffic controllers, how people are going to die because of it. I mean, Harrison Ford is in a tizzy, and we're spending this much money on bullets? Do you know that 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition is enough to fight a 20-year war and still have bullets left over? My question is, who is the Department of Homeland Security planning to shoot? Do you realize that over the past couple of months, our government has tried to pass bills through Congress allowing them to arrest American citizens without due process, allowing them to kill American citizens without due process?
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report? It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story. Came out in 2002. It starred Tom Cruise, remember? He played a police officer in something called the Department of Pre-Crime. Pre-crime is where people are arrested and incarcerated to prevent crimes that they have not yet committed.
Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubinos. Take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes. No, I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes.
Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemisms. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning." And it is stunning.
And it's got the 5 regions for the FEMA camps, and it talks about barricades and barbed wire and armed guards, and it says that they built the camps and that now they need to get ready to staff them, and that they need to be ready within a 72-hour period. And so I want to challenge everybody to call their friends and their families now and realize that the new economy is to put tens of millions of people, we already have the biggest prison population in the world, in this archipelago, this giant chain of facilities all over the country.
The following video details the contents of a Department of Defense document entitled Internment and Resettlement Operations, also known as FM 3-39.40. The document is 325 pages long and it is signed by Joyce E. Morrow, Administrative Assistant to the Secretary of the Army. It was created in 2010, however, has just been recently leaked to the public via the internet and can now be downloaded from multiple sources. In the description below, you'll find a download link for the document. I strongly encourage you to download it yourself and to verify everything that's being said here. The document outlines military procedures for internment and resettlement of civilians, and it describes the layout and the administration of these internment camps. It clearly states on page 38 that it applies within U.S. territory, and it specifically addresses the detainment of U.S. citizens, as is indicated by the identification procedures for new prisoners on page 146, which states that social security numbers are to be recorded alongside their photograph and fingerprints. Included in the list of organizations which may be involved in these internment operations are the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Department of Defense, and the United Nations. On page 56, the document outlines the responsibilities of psychological operations officers within the camps, among which it states that a PSYOP officer develops and executes indoctrination programs to reduce or remove antagonistic attitudes and identifies political activists. On page 281, the document goes into more detail regarding the role of psychological operations within the camps, specifically in regards to pacifying the population and ensuring cooperation. On page 238, it gives the conditions for the use of deadly force in such camps. Among the justifications for lethal force, it includes to terminate an active escape attempt. That point right there should make it clear that these camps are not benevolent disaster relief type facilities. On page 244, the document calls for the use of snipers during riots to, quote, scan a crowd and identify agitators and riot leaders for apprehension and fire lethal rounds if warranted. On page 260, it shows the basic layout for a facility focusing on detainment. It is depicted with interrogation areas, tribunal areas, and mortuaries. Each detainment facility is designed to hold 4,000 prisoners, and they are depicted with multiple levels of barbed wire separating compartments within the facilities, with a double barbed wire fence enclosing them, and watched over by 24 guard towers. On page 261, the document depicts the layout for what they call civilian resettlement facilities, which are designed to house 8,000 people. Though it uses the word resettlement, the plans show multiple levels of barbed wire dividing the sections of the facility, with double barbed wire fencing on the outside, as well as 16 guard towers. On page 262, the layout for facilities designed for what they call non-compliant prisoners is shown. These camps are designed to hold up to 300 prisoners, they have 3 interrogation centers, and are guarded by 13 guard towers. Now, if there's any question whether these plans are active or just theoretical, this should be settled by the fact that the U.S. Army has been running ads for job positions in these camps since 2009, and apparently, they're still hiring. Once again, if you look in the description, you'll find all the links you need to verify this information. It's important to note here that this document was created in 2010, which was under the Obama administration, and it predates the NDAA of 2012, which authorized military detainment of U.S. citizens. This clearly shows a long-term agenda at work.
Listen to this, folks.
I was pulled to the side road, which was a new cut gravel dirt road in front of a business, a builder supply business. And the right side of the road was filled with, which I thought was portable toilets. So I never looked at them that close. Same in color, maybe black, but which was an odd color. And I asked him about the field of black boxes. What were they? Because I'd never seen anything like that. And his statement was that if he told me, I would be one of few people in Madison, Georgia that knew about them. And he says they're disposable coffins, I believe he told me. And he says there's 100, at that time he said there was 125,000 there.
And the brother of the man that owns this field, that the government is leasing this field from to store these disposable coffins, this brother was given 3 years to set up temporary morgues around the country.
we now have a policy as exemplified by the FBI brochure from the on counterterrorism, which says people who are defenders of the U.S. Constitution against federal government and the UN, and make numerous references to the U.S. Constitution, should be monitored as potentially murderous and fanatical terrorists.
Department of Justice memo, which tells local police what should you be looking out for in kind of everyday terrorism prevention and terrorism watch activities. And one of the things that is considered a potential terrorist risk is individuals who harbor doubts about the official story regarding 9/11. The memo adds 9/11 official story skeptics to the growing list of targets.
If you go outside the city of Atlanta, go east about 60 or 70 miles to the town of Elberton, and then go north on Highway 77 about 10 miles, you'll find off to the right what's called the Georgia Guidestones. It looks kind of like Stonehenge, these big, huge granite rocks set up there. This was done by a guy who gave a pseudonym, came in, paid cash, had this company set these things up in 1980. He called himself R.C. Christian, but that's not his real name. It says right on the stones, a pseudonym, false name. On these Georgia Guidestones, it gives the 10 Commandments for the New World Order. 10 Commandments for the New World Order. The first commandment was to maintain humanity under 500 million. I went there and looked at those things and said, now, hold on a minute. Today's population is 6 billion. They want to maintain humanity under 0.5 billion. Looks like a lot of people got to die for their plan to work, which is, by the way, the plan. Jacques Cousteau said we'd have to eliminate 350,000 people a day. 1/3 of a billion people a day would have to be eliminated to save Mother Earth. Bill Clinton said we need to reduce the population of the Earth to 1 billion. There are a lot of folks who would like to reduce the population of the Earth. The Bible command is quite the opposite.
My friends, the information that you are about to witness from all of my years of research is the most important. It's been hidden in plain view the entire time. This is the ultimate secret, and it's about to be exposed. I have hundreds of government documents, textbooks, white papers, where for over 80 years, the elite of the Western world have talked about adulterating food and water to sicken and sterilize the population for the purpose of eugenics. It's all covered in the book Eco Science, written by the White House science czar John P. Holdren, where they talk about a planetary police state to carry out the forced sterilization. They also talk about covert systems in the water and food to sterilize the population. Now, this was written decades ago, before he was White House science czar. Now, suddenly, the stuff in this book is all over the news. They're selling it to the public as if it's a good thing. You see here before you what an average person would buy when they went shopping at the store. Not everything here is bad for you, but much of it has compounds and artificial chemicals that have been added that are extremely toxic and bad for your health. And they have known this the entire time, and they have approved them for use. Let's start with aspartame. You cannot go to the grocery store now and buy any type of even regular sugar gum that hasn't had aspartame added to it. In the 1970s, Searle